Welcome to the Non-Essential Podcast. I'm Steve Gibson.
I'm Ben Matlock.
And, we're here.
Hey. Welcome back. Big show today, guys. The big 9-5, and not a lot of people know this, but 95 episodes ago, we did one of these, so... and now we're doing it again. I
remember it like it was yesterday, because it was only about a year ago, but
yeah.
A year and a half, I guess.
It's been a long time. I don't want to remember when we started, because that was a long time ago.
It was a pretty great origin story where we did a video game podcast forever, and then decided, and
then I got bit by a spider, and that spider gave me podcasting powers.
Podcasting powers, yeah. But we quit podcasting for, a month maybe, and we're like, yeah, we should do a podcast.
Yeah, we quit a while before that. I think we took a good couple months off. Yeah. And we were like, what would be great if we didn't have to talk about these toys for children anymore and talked about something we're qualified for, like history. Even though I don't think we had one conversation about history or anything.
That's what was so funny about it. We just kind of went in a complete random direction. It was about a half-hour conversation. It's like, we should do a show.
Yeah, pretty much.
Do it.
Well, what kind of show could we do that wouldn't require us to maintain an actual website?
Or
or
actually
keep a theme,
pay attention to it. Right.
Or let me hit my microphone as hard as I can on accident. Today's story is about a good guy. He got way into Hitler. That's your first clue. It's another one of my classic. He was a big piece of shit in history stories. But it's not like a straight up Nazi story. This occurred a little bit sometime after World War II. So Graham Young, he was born in North London on September 7th, 1947. He died sometime after that. So see you next week. All right. No. So he was born to Fred and Bessie Young. Bessie unfortunately developed pleurisy during the pregnancy and would end up dying of tuberculosis 3 months after Graham was born.
See, I've heard of pleurisy before, and it always makes it sound like you become two people, like you become
pluralcy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So started to split into two.
It's like Zeus, where another one of you comes out of your head. Fred was distraught with the loss of his wife and sent the infant Graham to live with his Aunt Winnie. His elder sister Winifred was taken in by her grandparents.
I like that you don't send the one that you named after the aunt to the aunt.
Yeah.
I mean, I assume Winifred was named after Winnie. But,
it was just a coincidence, and it was really awkward. That whole time, Winnie thought Winifred was named after her, but they were like, not really. We never really cared for you, Winnie.
They were going to send them both to the aunt, and the aunt's like, there can only be one Winnie in this fucking household. Go. Get out. Usurper.
It would get confusing.
Yeah.
So
we can't possibly deal with that.
So Graham grew very close to his aunt and uncle the first 2 years of his life, almost like those years are very important for parental bonding. Go figure. Fred didn't give a shit, really. In 1950, he remarried a woman named Molly and said, all right, now I'll be a dad. So this led to, obviously, some pretty intense separation anxiety for Graham, being pulled from the only home he ever really knew into what was essentially a complete stranger's life for him. And he grew up kind of a weird, uncomfortable kid. He didn't socialize. His hobbies and interests never required more than just himself.
So far, he's sounding like a hero.
Well,
that's
okay. You're allowed that opinion at the end of the show, if that's.
No, you kind of spoiled where this is heading, so I was gonna fuck it up, but
oh yeah, and pretty quick too. So he didn't socialize and he didn't, hang out with other kids. And I really do wish that like more of these stories that start like this didn't always end in like the most predictable way. But you can probably guess right away that like the kid would end up falling in love with chemistry, toxicology, and notorious murderers.
Like the first two, you can make quite a career out of it. Then you have to, of course, add the third thing in. And it's like, damn it.
He particularly became fascinated with Dr. Crippen, who had been the culprit in a well-publicized poisoning murder in the early 1900s. That's another, we could probably do a show about that dude at some point. So as he was reaching his teens, he also started developing a fascination for Hitler and all his bullshit, claiming that Adolf was, quote, misunderstood, which is just a hilarious thing to say about somebody who talked as much as fucking Hitler did.
And it's interesting to me, somebody growing up in England that was like, for years, completely like bombed and like the people murdered by Hitler. And it's like, you just didn't understand.
You didn't get it. You didn't let him finish. Like, Hitler was crystal clear about what a fucking asshole he was. But yeah, I'm sure 13-year-old Graham could school us on what Hitler really meant. He also got into some occult shit, I guess, at that time. I don't know if this is true. I only saw one thing mention this at all, but apparently he did want to try to get children involved in some dumbass ceremonies that involved sacrificing local cats. Anyway, whatever he did, at this point...
I could see that, but that's also such a cliche, like, murderer thing. Like, oh, they started with cats.
Yeah, anytime there's a murderer story, there's at least... Some of them are true, but it seems like a lot more often they just make up something about animal abuse. But it's totally possible in this case. I wouldn't put it past Graham to be willing to take out some cats. Either way, Graham's father was a really kind of a stupid man and said, "This is all good. My boy is very smart." And buy him a chemistry set, which Graham would spend hours playing with.
I don't get how, because, like, you mix the things a few times and they bubble and turn colors and they're like, cool, chemistry.
Well, let Graham show you. So his fellow students nicknamed him the Mad Professor due to all the time he spent experimenting with it. Graham became so knowledgeable about subjects of toxicology and chemistry that he actually could convince professional chemists to supply him with huge quantities of poisonous chemicals at school.
That's I don't know if you've ever watched Phineas and Ferb. I loved that cartoon when it was around, and part of that, like, the stick that they'd always do is there's these two kids and they'd build these like a giant roller coaster that spans the whole town and stuff. So whenever they'd order like materials and the contractors would get there to drop it off, the running gag would be like, "Aren't you a little bit young to be like doing whatever?" Yeah. And they'd just be like, "Yeah, yes we are." And so to see that and like play out in real life, I didn't realize that was like an actual thing that would work.
Well, in their mind, no 13-year-old can know as much as he did. And with that kind of knowledge, they were convinced that, like, this guy, like, they were convinced he was, like, 17, which, like, you shouldn't be, you shouldn't be in a field that claims to be knowledgeable about fuck if you make that mistake. But they also thought, well, clearly it's going to go to, like, research purposes, because the kid knew his shit.
I was going to say... that still throws up flags in my head. We're like, oh, no 13-year-old should be supplied with endless quantities of toxins. But 17-year-old, sure.
Yeah.
That's the age where it's
well, Graham will, by the time his story's over, Graham will affect change as far as, like, what people can get their hands on just off the street. So, thinking he was 17 was their excuse for giving him massive quantities of antimony, digitalis, arsenic, and the heavy metal thallium. if you don't know much about these things, like on a chemistry level, all you need to know is that they're really fucking poisonous. And Graham was determined to use them just to see what the fuck would happen. His first victim was a fellow science pupil, a boy named Christopher Williams. Graham served him a tea laced with the chemicals he had been toying with, and whatever the cocktail makeup of this shit Graham served him led Williams to an extended period of vomiting, cramps, and headaches that doctors couldn't explain, because if it were poisoning, it would have to be a lot of fucking poison, and as far as they knew, Williams didn't have anyone that could have hated him that much. But Graham apparently didn't go as far as he could have with Williams, and the boy survived. Young decided to turn his attention and his experiments towards people he would have unlimited access to in order to better monitor the results of his tests. His family. Around 1961, members of the Young family started getting sick as Graham served them his various teas and coffees. Graham's father believed that it may have been inadvertent poisoning from whatever Graham was doing with his chemistry set, but the boy denied that he was being careless with his experiments, which was technically true. This was all part of the plan. Yeah. And nobody thought for a second that Graham would be doing this intentionally. And Graham himself was...
It doesn't seem like he particularly harbored any, like... Well, I mean, obviously he had ill intent. He's trying to poison him and see what happens, but it's not like it led up like, oh, he was constantly fighting with his family and
I think, that is a common thing when you talk about, like, killers and serial killers and stuff, is, like, how much is it just, like, a natural compulsion and how much of, like, early environment shapes them. And it's usually a mixture of all of these things. But I'm sure... part of it was his nature, but I'm also sure that being separated from, you don't have your biological mother in your life. Somebody comes in and it becomes your mother figure. And then even at that early of an age, you're being bounced over to another household, and it depends on the person, but I'm sure there's just a point where you just stop developing attachments to people. And that seems to be what happened with Graham a little bit. Because just early childhood, it was like, he had this family, but you never got the vibe that they were that
It's almost
close.
like they were more roommates, yeah.
Yeah. And it's worth noting, during all this, Graham himself was getting sick at times. Nobody's quite sure if this was by design or just a natural result of a kid fucking around with deadly poisons way too much. But he was also getting sick, so again, that threw more smoke in the way of like him being the culprit. Graham's father became suspicious again when Graham's sister, was found to be poisoned by belladonna, which is also more popularly known as like nightshade, in November of that year. But he took no action, and his wife Molly became Graham's main target. She would gradually get sicker and sicker until one day in April of the following year, Fred found his wife writhing in agony in the garden while Graham watched with a fascination. Molly would die in the hospital that night.
At that point, he became mildly suspicious.
Basically, yeah. So, Molly was cremated, which Graham was, at the time, surprisingly earnest to suggest. Eventually it came out that she had developed a tolerance to the antimony that Young was using originally to poison her, and he switched to thallium the night before her death. But at this point, nobody really knew how she died. Even at the funeral, he was serving people his teas and shit, and people were getting sick there.
He must have been using some really good fucking tea to mix it with, though. They're like, okay, this is probably poisoned, but you know what? I could go for some Earl Grey.
But again, it's like, with these chemicals and stuff, it's like, how much he actually has to put in there to get you sick. I'm not a chemist, so I don't know, but it could be just like, you don't need much. You're drinking a heavy metal.
Right.
After Molly's death, Fred's poisoning was ratcheted up and he too was hospitalized. But even with his suspicions, he just couldn't make that breakthrough that Graham was responsible for all this. But
it really, really sounds like he didn't try to make that
which, I mean, hey, a father might put the blinders on to that extent.
I guess.
But it's like, what the hell else could be happening, dude? But a teacher found all his poisons and books about poisoning in Graham's school desk and immediately told the police. But some reports say that his aunt recognized Graham's fascination with poisoning, and she stepped in and notified people. So it's hard to say. Either way, Graham didn't hide his fascination with this enough to get away with it forever. So upon talking to a police psychiatrist and basically admitting right away that he knew way too fucking much about poisoning, and that he was responsible for his family's illnesses as well as that of Williams, he was immediately, arrested. No murder charges were brought up about the death of Molly because her body was cremated. There was no way at the time to
prove it,
get evidence. But he was committed to a maximum security hospital for 15 years. It didn't stop him at all.
I was going to say that generally doesn't cure people. It just...
Well, I mean, not even being in the facility stopped him. An inmate named John Berridge died from cyanide poisoning that Young would extract from laurel bush leaves. But nobody believed him when he said he did it. And nobody believed him, and they called Berridge's death a suicide.
Hey, I'm a well-known chemist that's also been known to poison people. I did it. And they're like, we think this guy that knew nothing about poisons extracted it from this bush.
You don't got the balls, Graham. So staff also found drinks tampered with. They also found a tea urn containing what was called sugar soap, which is a chemical used for preparing painted walls. And if he had done what he wanted to do with that amount, he could have caused a mass poisoning if they hadn't discovered it when they did.
Well, that's kind of on whoever called it sugar soap, because the soap part doesn't sound great, but why add sugar to the name? Like,
I don't know. Maybe it's a consistency thing. I had never heard of it until this.
It gets you like culpable deniability, or I don't know, like plausible deniability, because they say, "Oh, well, we were serving tea, and I just asked, do you want sugar?"
Soap.
Like I didn't.
Soap. Graham kept doing his shit and reading about it, but he eventually started getting better at hiding it, knowing that if he could put off the appearance that he had abandoned his obsession, it would speed up his release. And experts bought it. By 1970, doctors claimed he was cured and he was to be released.
People keep dying mysteriously, but it's definitely not this guy.
Right. Oh, God, this is a total story of blinders. Like, thinking that he was in the clear, he told a nurse he would kill one person for every year he had been in Broadmoor. The comment was recorded officially, and they let him go anyway. Because what the fuck?
Be like, look, he was in here for poisoning, not murder threats. We can't do anything.
I threaten to kill people every year all the time. He's an innocent man.
It really was? Is they're like, we just fucking want him out of here. We're sick of being poisoned. He's cured. Go.
He's a weird little bastard, and I'm sick all the time. Upon release, Fred Young, unsurprisingly, wanted nothing to do with his son. But his sister was more forgiving and maintained some contact with him. But through their conversations, she was disturbed that he still had this intact fixation on his crimes. He took great delight in revisiting the scenes and relished the reaction of old neighbors who would gradually realize who he was. He was staying in a hostel, but would make trips to London to re-up his supply of poisons, and was quickly back to work on his experiments. One hostel resident experienced the same cramps and sickness of the others, and another who had befriended Graham experienced it to such a painful extent that he took his own life.
Cool.
Young found a job at a photographic supply firm, His employers knew he had been sentenced to time at Broadmoor, but didn't know that it was for poisoning specifically. Like, they didn't know the nature of his crimes, just that he had been there. If they had...
Now I'm picturing, the interview where he keeps asking, do I have to work around dangerous chemicals? And they're just like, don't worry, it's safe.
Yeah.
And he's not asking because he's afraid of them. He wants them, but they're like, don't worry about it.
Yeah. I mean, if they had known what he had done, they probably wouldn't have given him a job that would give him easy access to more thallium, which is, a chemical used in photographic processes. But to be fair, Graham was already getting his supply from some unsuspecting pharmacist in London. So he wasn't technically doing the job to get more poisons, but I'm sure it was a perk to him. And he got the job, and naturally began to fit into the workplace with a willingness to make tea and coffee for all his coworkers. His boss, a 59-year-old Bob Agel, began to experience cramps and dizziness, but people attributed it to a virus going around at the time called the Bovingdon bug that was mostly affecting school children. Agel had the most severe symptoms of anyone, but curiously seemed to recover when he was off work, but became more ill every time he returned. He eventually died in July of 1971, the cause being recorded as pneumonia.
To which Young was pissed off. He's like, that's not what fucking killed him. Damn it, fix your report.
I love it. I love how you can kind of, like, you make a joke, but it's like, yeah, that is his feelings on the subject. September of that year, 60-year-old Fred Biggs showed similar extensive symptoms as Agel, and employees all over the lab were becoming more and more absent with cramps, hair loss, and just various other ailments. People thought it could have been water contamination, even radioactive fallout, or just like a leakage of the laboratory chemicals somehow, but nobody could find the actual culprit. Biggs was admitted to the hospital, but didn't succumb to the poisoning until mid-November of 1971. Graham kept a diary during all of this and recorded his severe displeasure with how the old man endured his poisoning for so long. So after Biggs's death, at this point, like 70 employees recorded similar symptoms, and staff-wide there was great fear for personal safety. Staff doctors tried to reassure everyone that the health and safety rules were being strictly adhered to, but Graham himself challenged one of the doctors, asking why thallium poisoning had not been considered during all this, considering it was the most plentiful poison at the lab. The doctor was surprised how much Graham knew about all this, and brought it to the management's attention, who immediately alerted the police.
So I like because my thought there is that the doctor only did it because he was butthurt that, like, it wasn't that he actually suspected him of poisoning. Yeah, he's like, oh yeah, I'll teach you, you asshole, to tell me how to do my job. I'm gonna frame you for poisoning.
The doctor did it. Upon forensic inquiries, this thallium poisoning would actually be the first known confirmed case of deliberate poisoning with the heavy metal ever recorded. So Graham's earlier poisoning conviction, it's worth noting that Graham, kind of after this like confrontation with the doctor, he kind of ran off to go, quote, visit with his father. But the police were investigating him during all this, and it's here they learned about his earlier poisoning convictions, and they found his collection of poisons and the meticulous diaries where he recorded dosage and reactions from his crimes. They caught up with him 4 days afterwards, visiting with his father, which must have been great. Like, you're the dad, you're trying to give this kid another chance. And he gets arrested for poisoning, like, as soon as you see him again. He
was probably currently poisoning his dad during that 4-day visit, too.
Yeah. Yeah, probably. They found thallium on him at the time of the arrest. Under interrogation, he admitted to the poisonings verbally, but would not sign a written admission of guilt. He seemed confident that despite being dead to rights, just guilty as fuck, he was smart enough to beat the case and relish the spotlight. The trial began in June 1972. He was charged with 2 counts of murder, 2 attempted, and 2 counts of administering poison. Young pleaded not guilty, feeling that it would be impossible to prove him to be the only one with the means to poison Egil and Biggs. He loved the attention he was getting, though, and went out of his way to appear sinister and unnerving to the jury and gallery. The world poisoner, they'll call me.
Yeah, that's an interesting defense tactic.
Yeah, like, it was that mixed thing. Like, he just thought he was smarter than everyone. So he felt like he didn't even have to, like, perform. Like, and he would get off on a technicality. He wanted them to call him the world poisoner. And so he was probably pretty pissed when papers started calling him the teacup poisoner.
Damn it.
But that's how he's known today. So tough shit, Graham. But Young didn't understand that the strides forensic science had taken since he killed his stepmother were pretty great. And that having a diary where you chronicle your murders in detail can have a pretty strong effect on a jury.
Yeah, that's the thing that was going to... If he hadn't kept the diaries and you're working at a place that with that much thallium around, that would be real...
Yeah.
I wouldn't say really easy, but you could sow that doubt. Say, look, the cops, this employee got fired by this guy that got poisoned. Maybe it was that guy or whatever.
Like, I'm sure they showed him like a written confession he could have signed, but I'm sure the cops were like, really, like, this is for you. You're fucked, dude. And he received 4 life sentences on June 19th. When the jury learned of his previous crimes against his family, they recommended an urgent review in the legality of publicly selling poisons, and the Home Secretary recommended an assessment on the control, treatment, and release of mentally unstable prisoners. Which, I mean, okay, probably should have been ahead of the game on that, but by 1973, this process would undergo a fairly extensive reformation. When asked if he had any remorse, all he replied was that what I feel is the emptiness of my soul. So, very goth.
Yeah. They were like, fuck, we need to get this guy a contract,
we need
techno.
If only he threw that energy into poetry and not poisons. Yeah. He met another killer in Parkhurst prison, Ian Brady of the Moors murders, which is a whole other fucked up story. Like, to go into detail of that would be like probably 3 or 4 episodes to really do that shit justice. Brady was attracted to Graham, but described Graham Young as genuinely asexual, who only was excited by power, experimentation, observation, and death. But they did play chess, and they did bond over their fascination with Nazism. Graham Young died in his cell on August 1st, 1990. The cause was ruled heart failure, but some believe Young may have poisoned himself as sort of one last act of controlling his own destiny. So that's the story of Graham Young. There's a couple fun facts here, though. One fun fact is his use of thallium as a poison revealed its effectiveness to the U.S. military, who coated missiles with it during the first Gulf War.
Cool.
Yeah, so, because the U.S. military is the only place where they look at fucking serial killers and like, that's a good idea.
I do. Yeah, and they're also, part of the UN that's like, use of chemical weapons as a war crime, unless we do it
first, and then we'll make it illegal after that war.
Yeah,
and then that gives us time to find a new one. And in November 2005, a 16-year-old girl in Japan basically tried to do the same type of poisoning to her own mother, and kept a blog recording the data the same way Young did. She was, total copycat sort of killer there. She was super fascinated with Young.
I was going to ask if they could link, like, if she was literally copying him, so it sounds like it. Yeah,
it was definitely a hero worship sort of thing. So yeah, Graham Young, cool guy doing cool shit.
I love that it always takes something like this for them to be like, you know what? Maybe just selling poison to anybody that asks for it's a bad idea.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's just we don't know what the lines should be until it's like crystal clear how wrong we are.
I like to see the prison. It's like, you know what? Upon further reflection, maybe when we go to let somebody out and they start laughing maniacally and saying, I'm going to kill all you fuckers, we should probably not let them out.
Yeah, like murder threats should be a cause to deny parole, you know?
Boy, do we have egg on our face.
Whoopsie. So, yeah.
It's amazing how many of these stories of serial killers, it's only possible because of a mind-blowing amount of enabling from the people around them.
Just like not recognizing, and I think a lot of times it's that thing of like with the dad, like putting the blinders on. And I think part of it is there are like those people in these killers' lives who just turn the other cheek and just don't think about it, and it becomes kind of out of sight, out of mind. A lot of times I'm sure it's like you also don't know how to approach it. Like, you know, I know if my kid started like worshiping fucking Hitler, I would mock him relentlessly. Like, and I, you know, it probably wouldn't end well for anyone involved, because I would just be flabbergasted at how fucking stupid my own child could be. But, you know, like, yeah, I'm sure that, you know, like, by all accounts, Fred did not seem like a great dad.
Well,
and it was also a tough circumstance.
I'd say it's weird though, because it's like, well, Fred was the
father.
His actual, okay, yeah, not the one that...
Graham was the poisoner. Fred's the father. Yeah.
But it's like, you know, they were willing to like look the other way, and he said that he supplied him with, you know, chemistry and like kind of...
But like buying your kid a chemistry set, but not really engaging with him.
Yeah.
Like what's he doing with it? That's the same as just like, here's a toy, now go play. You know?
I bought you a bike, now love me, or whatever.
Yeah,
but don't
you're
bother
not
me.
like, you're not actually engaged with that kid.
Yeah.
It's kind of just giving him something to do. You know, it's like when I throw the ball for my dog. Like, you know, I'm reading shit on my phone, and she knows that, and it pisses her off. But I'm just like, take your toy.
The only other thing that's real interesting to me is he had an opportunity to kill way more people than he did, but it seemed like he was very focused on like...
There was like, what's kind of eerie about it, the reason I didn't just... You know, there's a lot of evil fucking people in history, and there's a lot of killers and stuff I could bring to the show, but I do try to find something that's unique to them, and like, because, you know, these aren't... we could just do a serial killer podcast, but that I feel like that would get almost like kind of weirdly celebratory, and that's not how we want to talk about these people. But so there has to be something unique to him that I think is worth talking about. And with him, I think it's just how analytical he approached it. Like, you know,
right? Because if it was just about poisoning people to death, he could have easily just... Because really, that's how poison works. If you just dump a shitload of poison in something, well, then they're not going to... But now you probably won't get away with it very, very long either. But yeah, obviously he was kind of toying with them, seeing how much that they could take. Probably trying to record like how you build up tolerances or whatever. That'd be my guess from the way he killed his mom or stepmom, whatever you want to call her. She built up the tolerance to whatever, and then switching to thallium.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think he was interested in the process of the shit he was doing, and I don't think, you know, like he could have just wandered around, you know, poisoning people, and I think it was like things like the funeral, like he didn't poison people at the funeral to take out an entire funeral parlor, like he did it, you know, to see like, okay, they're getting sick now, see how they're reacting and stuff. Like, he totally fucking batshit crazy. But not, you know, and it's kind of true with a lot of killers. Like, it went beyond just ending a life. Like, a lot of times with killers, there's a power dynamic there. And I think that's true for him too. But the power dynamic for him was less in the moment control and more of like, I am running this experiment and these are all my pawns in it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. It's a way to draw out that whole...
Right. So yeah.
It's a good guy. Yeah.
Fucking one of the best. Friend of the show.
Not too many good stories start out with like, oh yeah, man, this guy back in the 80s, his name was Jim. He liked Hitler a lot, but he went on to do great things. Like,
yeah, I want that story. I liked Hitler, but turned it around real quick before anything could get bad.
Or just you act like that was the one weird quirk about him. It's like he didn't stop liking Hitler, but he just never did anything bad. Like, you know, well, he ran an orphanage, and once he saved a cat from a burning tree. I think it's
literally impossible to like Hitler, but not do anything bad.
Well,
like,
yeah.
I think that is so, like, I think if a guy tried to live that way, they would just spontaneously combust because it's just two different natures, like in constant like battle in your mind.
But that's what gets so frustrating when people try to like write that off as like, well, yeah, he was evil, but he was a good speaker. It's like, well, there's a million good speakers in history you can idolize. Shut the fuck up about Hitler. Like, he
wasn't that good of a speaker. He was just loud. Like, yeah. Like, I have seen the fucking Hitler quotes, all right? They're just as fucking stupid and hate-filled, like, then as they are now. Like, it's just people... Because we hear similar hateful fucking dumbass rhetoric today. And you see people, like, switch their fucking brain off to it and be like, well, what he's actually saying is blah, blah, blah. And it's like, no, he said what he said because he believes it. You know,
but he said it energetically, so I like that.
And you're nodding with it and cheering for it because you believe it,
right?
And you know, not much has actually changed. We like to think like World War II was so far away, but like.
But my point is, if any of you listeners out there know somebody that's a genuinely great person, but they like Hitler, let us know because I want to know how that works. Like,
yeah, we'll interview him on the show.
It would be such a weird interview too. Be like, oh man, yeah, what do you think about this? Yeah, because
every question, I would have 15 questions in front of me, and it's all just how. Like how and why, and just on repeat.
But you make a good point too, though, about this is jumping around a bit, but how, you know, you got to watch when you do serial killers. There's a lot of serial killer podcasts out there, and I think most of them are good at. We've talked about it before. Like, you can focus on like the interestingness, like, of the thing that happened without like celebrating it. Like, more like here's a dissection of like what happened.
It's never. I'm never gonna be one of those people who's gonna like. It's too psychologically fascinating to like pick apart these stories about like the worst parts of humanity kind of coming to life. Like we're always going to be drawn to that. It's just keeping that perspective of like, these aren't main characters in a story. These were real things that happened that really ruined lives, you know?
And where I was going with that is that's very similar to the Hitler thing, where not too many great stories start out with, well, he had a fascination with killers. Like,
yeah,
but there are a lot of people that do, but when it becomes the point that that's your identity, that's usually a red flag.
Yeah, I would say I have a fascination with killers.
Yeah, but when people talk about Ben, I'm thinking that they're not like, hey, yeah, Ben, he's a pretty cool guy and he likes killers a lot. Like, it's not your
yeah,
not your go-to thing.
Yeah, you know, it wouldn't be in the list of things I would do to describe myself.
Although that one I can't. Where it differs is that I think it is possible you could probably be obsessed with serial killers. I think
the line where it's drawn is like, I'm interested in killers as like a subject, and there are like individual stories, obviously, in that to read about. He was interested in killers as like celebrities.
How did they do it? Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
Like he like there is a, like I said, there is a line between like being fascinated with like, you know, sort of the psychology of evil and like relating to it,
Right.
And I think he was easily over that line. This is all just me defending myself.
I do.
Please don't send it. Please don't confuse me for one of these people.
I do love the this is the classic non-essential podcast type twist on it too. How he wanted to be called the World Poisoner, which is the worst nickname I think I've ever heard.
The God Poisoner. Yeah.
That's almost better. At least that's some delusional grand. The World Poisoner just sounds like every. Major
it's funny
industry.
he says World Poisoner when I don't think he left England.
Right. But and then on top of it, it's no, that nickname's dumb. You're the Teacup Poisoner. It's
should have found a better method, Dick.
Keep it up, we'll call you the Daisies and Puppy Dog Poisoner.
Well, that would be sad. Poisoning puppies.
Yeah.
That would be frightening though. So, he somehow poisoned you by getting you to pet a puppy.
Oh god, because it would work every time. That would be one that I could see where exactly how he's doing it, and you'd be like, can't not pet puppy.
It's like those
son of a bitch.
Those radiation puppies in Chernobyl. It's
Chernobyl, yeah.
It'd be the hardest part about going there is these adorable little dogs, and you can't pet them. I'm like, bullshit, I can't.
My skin's falling off and sticking to their fur, but it's worth it.
It's fine. They're licking it. They're licking all the fucking radiation burns off. They're so cute.
Look how they scrunch their nose as they're gnawing on my fingers.
Look at Wuffy Wuff. And then you die.
Yep.
That's what I assume radiation death sounds like. Yeah, that's the show this week. Thank you. Goodbye.